Alright, so today we're going to be talking about some of the top rogue decks that can actually compete with the meta. Before we get into it, I totally understand that there is a bunch of decks that are viable right now, so please share your thoughts about which decks you think should have to make the list. But today we're just going to be discussing these 5, which are kind of like they were rogue, but they're kind of meta at this point. So I don't know, I think this video is going to be fun, but let's discuss all of the decks in the comments down below. So make sure to like the video as well if you do enjoy it. For the first deck, I think we cannot start this video without mentioning Mikanko. It won the Santa Cruz YCS, and we also saw it at YCS Indianapolis, but basically, let me pull up the list that I have over here. It's going to be a little bit easier to talk about the deck with the help of this deck list. So essentially, Mikanko as an engine was always fine. Like, some of the cards are actually really good, but like it was this going second deck and it just isn't that amazing by itself. Didn't really get a lot of tops. Just here and there, it was like this roguish deck, you know, that kind of squeezed in there and some top cuts, but that was pretty much it. Now with the Acid Golem lock, it's a different story. So the Genenken cards really did a lot for this deck. And when they were released, we all kind of saw that there's potential there. It does seem like it's consistently going to be able to turn on Talents and Thrust, which if you look at the deck list, this person is also playing Talents and Thrust as part of the non-engine, but it works with their engine of Genenken, which is cool. So there's that. The new Diabella Star cards are also really good. And as for this deck list, it is missing one Renault, which is really important because it is a level 1 fire as well as Fire Flint Lady for the Diabella Star side of things, and you're going for the Isolde combos. So the way this deck is built and the way Mikanko probably is going to be played, because it like proved itself to be successful in this version, is going first with the Acid Golem lock. So you give them Acid Golem with Geonator Transverser and you take back the Gen or Ken, whichever you gave to them, so then you lock them out. It's degenerate. It is a lock. We're not a fan of locks, but that's how Mikanko can actually perform in this meta. So we'll see if it actually becomes like a viable meta contender or if it just remains rogue. If people don't want to play the lock, then maybe they won't do as well, because the going second stuff didn't really perform, like I said. But all in all, you know, this deck seems good because it is very consistent at what it does. Like, the second you open your engines, doesn't even need to be all 3 of them. You just need a way to Isolde and to get to the combo. And since you play everything that you play is pretty much your engine, you're always going to get to that, because Nibiru is your only non-engine card if you count the Talents and Thrust as part of the engine, since you almost kind of could, because you're turning them on anyway because of Genenken. So it abuses this engine, plays the Diabella Star, plays the lock. It is degenerate, but it is also very good. And also, if you look at the extra deck, there is so much utility in there, and you can just pretty much play whatever. And you have Herald to access code for OTKs, Apollousa to establish it, so you get protected from a couple things. You also have, of course, you need the Isolde. There's Zeus for wiping boards, and the side deck also has a lot of space for you to play all of the hand traps and everything else to combat the other decks, because you just don't have that much space in the main deck. The deck is nice, and it is a little bit toxic, but it is strong. So yeah, I wanted to mention it and really give the props, obviously, to the player as well for doing so well at the YCS. So, okay, Mikanko is our first deck. Moving on to Infernoble. This is very similar. It's just Isolde combos. And I feel like we have talked about Isolde for the longest time. Literally for years now, people have been saying Isolde needs to be hit. It's really, really strong. Just like we've been saying for Curious, and then Curious actually got banned a little too late, but that's besides the point. So speaking of, you know, Isolde and everything that's degenerate, in the Infernoble deck, I wouldn't necessarily call it toxic. It's just part of the engine, and it's able to establish boards. So it's just a very solid rogue deck, a combo deck. And I feel like, you know, it was kind of struggling with Arise Heart being in the meta, and right now it is able to do well at a regional level. We're not really seeing it have a lot of success at bigger events, but not all of us are going to bigger events. So I feel like if you're playing at locals or regionals, you can pick up Infernoble, and essentially you're just going to be able to learn a lot, because combo decks are always going to teach you something. It is very tough to pilot them properly. You need to think about gazillion different things because you want to be going for your combo, but you also need to think about if you get disrupted, how you want to play it out, or if you do get disrupted at that point in time, you need to think on the spot and sort of make a couple changes with your plays. So it's not that easy. And I think that's what makes the deck really good, is always when a deck is able to do a lot, it's going to be better. Like in some instances, you know, some trap decks kind of just have to rely on drawing the perfect hand, the perfect combination of the cards you need. And in combo decks, it's like, it's just more aggressive and it's able to do much more. So even if you get disrupted, you're establishing at least something and probably surviving and then being able to play on the following turn. So, you know, as much as some combo decks are a little fragile sometimes, I wouldn't necessarily say that for Infernoble. It is able to play through disruption, especially if you know how to pilot it. And also going second, with the help of a lot of different extenders, which got released over the years, and like just support for the Infernoble deck, it's able to play through boards and really force interaction. So I think this deck is very rewarding to play, and it is quite well positioned in the meta, and I do think it's a little bit underrated. So keep an eye out for that deck. And moving on, we need to talk about Sprite. Now, a couple decks on this list, like I said, they could be considered meta, rogue, whatever, but since like some of the top tier decks are like Rescue Ace, Purrely, Tier, you know, stuff like that, I do want to consider Sprite and some other ones rogue, I guess. It doesn't really matter that much, you know, how you classify them. If you play them and do well, that's great. And speaking of doing well, we saw Sprite do well at Indy as well as Santa Cruz. And what I really like about the deck right now is the fact that it can be played with so many different engines. And I talked about this when I did my meta decks under $100. If you haven't seen that video, make sure to watch it so you can, you know, get a couple ideas about which decks to pick up for cheaper. And I talked about Sprite in that video, and basically you can play it with Tri Brigade, with Adventure Stuff, which now post reprint is really cheap. You can play it with Swap Frog, as well as, you know, a way to go to Totally Awesome. So a very old school version of Sprite. You can mash all of that together in one pile of 50 cards, just like it happened, I think, in top 32 at Santa Cruz. And you can also play it with Runic Stuff still if you want to. Runic cards are good, like they're always gonna be good. They are pseudo non-engine actually, although they are part of the engine. And the Sprite deck is just really nice. Once it establishes a board, it is really tough to crack because they put up so many different types of disruption. They have smashers as well as a bounce, monster negate, trap negate, and it really depends on what they are going for, you know, as like the additional part of disruption, Toad, Adventure Stuff, all of that. And speaking of different versions, you also have going second versions of Sprite, and it's always nice when a deck is able to go second. It's kind of tough for some decks. Like the next deck we're going to be discussing, it's not that easy for it to go second, but Sprite is well positioned in that regard because it doesn't have the biggest engine, so you can really fill up the rest with impactful non-engine. You can just also play it very pure and basic with Melfi Stuff, which I haven't really seen that much of recently, but it's still an option for you. And yeah, I just feel like it's one of those decks that is not that hard to learn, which is great, because then you can really test it and hone your skills and become much, much better. Because when you're a good Sprite player, there's a big difference between a really good Sprite pilot and just someone that learned it because it's easy to learn. So I'm gonna leave it at that. I think it can give you a lot if you pilot it well. And okay, moving on to the next that I already sort of alluded to, we're gonna be talking about Mannadium. Now, I get that Mannadium could also be considered meta at this point. I totally understand. But still, you know, it was kind of a roguish deck, tier 2 deck, and then it started to see results at Indy as well as Santa Cruz and just, you know, regionals all around. I think Mannadium is cool. I mentioned that it doesn't have the easiest time going second, but you still have quite a lot of space for non-engine. You have like 9 to 12 spots, almost 100%, to put in your deck and still remain at 40. With the new Visas Samsara and the Synchro, the new Kitkallos Synchro, you know which one I'm talking about, the deck really gained a ton of power. So Visas Samsara being another Visas monster makes the biggest difference. It is so good. It's just so nice. And as for the Synchro, just being able to immediately go into it, you know, revive a tuner, get to the Visas Amritara, which is also another piece of support from one of the last sets. It's able to be made with all tuners if you want, which is a little odd for a Synchro, but that's cool because you usually have a bunch of tuners. So just being able to easily make that one and not worry about your tuners and non-tuners, that's nice. It's able to get you to a Mannadium card, which is really, really important for you to get to like fairly consistently get to your chap card. So you have additional ways of protecting yourself, or just, to any of the cards that you need to continue your plays. And it's also very versatile in terms of the end board that you can go for. SP also did a lot for the deck because it can be part of your end board, which is nice. You go for a lot of different synchro monsters. You can include Chaos Angel if you want. You can play the Omega Loop and Bishbalkin, like Crimson Dragon, all of that, the Lock, which both of them are a little bit degenerate, but like we talked about, when it comes to Mikanko, decks do degenerate things, and at the end of the day, you're just trying to win the event, and if it gets hit, it gets hit, you exclude it from your deck and you move on. So for the most part, if this makes you feel any better, the builds that I've been seeing only play Omega, or no Omega at all. Usually it's just Omega, so for the most part, people are going to be going just for boards and maybe a hand loop, so it is not that bad. But yeah, Mannadium is just nice, and people just kind of weren't prepared for it and don't really know how to counter it, where to disrupt it. It is a little bit tough because a lot of times if you disrupt it in the incorrect point, which might feel the correct point for you, but they have an extender, you're just nagging. And not to mention that you're hand looping yourself on top of them hand looping you. So you kind of would have to throw hand traps at them to prevent the hand loop, because going second cards are not going to do that much, but then you just have 0 cards to play with. It's tough. And that's why the deck is really good. And I don't know, I'm all for it. I've been testing it and I like it. So, okay, that's it when it comes to Mannadium. And as for the last deck, I always do this. I'm gonna do it one more time. Let me know what you think should be the last deck on the list, but I will give you a couple ideas. So Vanquish Soul did top at Indie, as well as Rika and the Bestial Horus deck. So those three I wanted to point out because Rika is just a very nice combo deck. It is kind of tough to pilot. People still don't really know what it does and how to disrupt it. So it is very rewarding and fairly easy to play through a couple cards. Like there's not one particular card that just completely kills the deck. A lot of times you draw well enough to just establish something and probably survive. So there's that. The Bestial Horus deck is cool because it can be played in many different versions. Like it's pretty much like, I just call it Dragon Link, and then Dragon Link has many different, I guess, branches, if that makes sense. It's the Bestial Horus Vision Resonator and the Red Dragon Archfiend stuff, and then the regular Dragon Link. So anything Dragon I feel like is really good right now, and you can really play around and play it with different engines, and like the Horus stuff is really cool. So I think that's a contender to think about. And also what did we mention? Vanquish Soul. So Vanquish Soul also topped at Indie, and I just feel like this deck it's a little underrated. Like, just because it breaks sometimes and it doesn't really seem like it has a ton of power because it doesn't put up this huge board, this doesn't mean that it's not good. It is still able to draw a ton, go just through a lot of resources and establish a lot in terms of non-engine that you have to just throw at your opponent or stop your opponent with your Vanquish Soul cards. And with the new support, it just has a fire monster that's actually part of the engine and part of the archetype, which is great. So now you don't need to sort of scramble and try to play Ash and Kurikara and random stuff, so that's cool. Although like Ash is still fine. But yeah, I feel like those decks are worth mentioning, so please let me know which decks you think are the best sort of rogue, under the radar contenders that can be played right now, and I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!